Okay, looks like we're live again. Let me just go and get my Instagram folks on, and I think we'll treat this as though we were never on and just start fresh. All right, hello everyone. Give me a moment just to get all the platforms running smoothly, I trust. All right, we tried this live a few moments ago and I had camera issues and the one camera powered down, so it takes me a few minutes to get going again. But welcome, I'm Susan Smith, and you're in my studio, Stitched by Susan. Talking today about what supplies are actually necessary for beginning free motion quilting at a sit-down machine. And I don't often talk to super novices as a lot of my classes are geared more toward quilting designs or problem solving or challenges at a quilt and not necessarily to getting started. But I thought perhaps there's some of you viewing who would like to know some of this. So this is just my opinion. Certainly I don't have a hugely broad experience, but I did begin my machine quilting journey at a sit-down domestic sewing machine. So I'm just going to give you what I know and my opinions about that. The things that you need are actually fairly few. You need a machine to stitch at, you need layers, a quilt sandwich to stitch upon, and then you need a way to move the fabric under the needle. So let's talk about each of those three areas and touch on them. And I see a few of you coming in again, so that's great. That means I've got it working, I hope. Debbie, I'm back. Me too. Kim and Virginia, Rebecca, Vicki, Heather. Good, good. Everyone's able to tune in. That's great. So let's talk sewing machine for a moment. I do have friends who quilt on machines from a featherweight. She actually quilts, her name is Darlene, she quilts whole quilts on a featherweight sewing machine, which is teeny tiny, through the Cadillacs of sewing machines, through mid-arm machines, and even long arm machines that are mounted in a table. Those are all different sizes. They have all kinds of bells and whistles, but honestly, all of those are a matter of personal preference. What size of quilt you're making, what type of quilt you like doing, how much space you've got in your studio, all those things. I'm not going to get into all of that today, but I am going to say my personal opinion, my point of view, is that a better quality machine will make your journey easier, will make the process smoother. And I don't necessarily mean an expensive machine, but the most entry level or perhaps the oldest will not necessarily stitch smoothly and be as easy to work on. Think of, for example, in your kitchen, knives. My kitchen knives are very dear to my heart. I'd rather have a few good ones than a whole array of lackluster knives. You know, can you cut an onion with anything that's remotely knife shaped? Yes, you can. But it's a ton easier if you've got an appropriate size and it's nice and sharp and it has a slim blade, right? It just makes the job so much easier. Somewhat of the same holds true with your machine. A better quality machine is just going to give you nicer quality stitches. You'll have less hassles with tension. It will accept more types of thread readily, those sorts of things. So enough said about that. One of the features that's really important is you'll be moving your fabric under the needle and it needs to move freely. So that is the definition of free motion, is that the machine is not being guided by any sort of computer or belt driven or anything like that. Either you're moving the machine freely, which is what I typically do at a long arm, or you're moving the fabric freely, but that's what makes it free motion. So all sewing machines have feed dogs underneath that presser foot, and those feed dogs are moving with every stitch. They're pulling that fabric. They're like a little railroad track, and they're pulling that fabric through under the needle, which is great when you're sewing along a seam. But if you want to move freely in every direction, not so great. So most sewing machines these days, most sewing machines will have just at the push of a button, you can drop the feed dogs. So they'll just recess into the machine, and now you can move your fabric freely across it. I know there are mechanisms for covering the feed dogs, like with a silicone mat, but here again, refer to rule number 1. Just go as much as you can for the better equipment. It will be easier for you. Having a mat over the feed dogs is still going to produce a bit of a hump, my opinion, but go for a machine that will drop the feed dogs for you. It'll make your life so much easier, and most of them do. Anything that's manufactured in the last 25 years probably will. Secondly, you need something called a hopper foot, and it hops because it's actually spring-loaded. Can you see that? It actually bounces because When you're sewing a seam at a sewing machine, you lower the presser foot and it works in conjunction with the feed dogs to always keep pressure on your fabric. But remember, now you're moving it freely. So a free motion quilting foot literally hops up and down with every stitch. So it's just touching the fabric while the stitch is being formed, holding it still while the stitch is being formed, and then immediately releasing. So a spring-loaded foot is critical. And this, by the way, shameless plug for my Bernina long arm machine. This hopper foot I can use interchangeably between my long arm, which is off to my right, that's why I keep pointing over there, and my domestic sewing machine. It fits on both, which is kind of cool, and any of the spring-loaded Bernina feet do that. So if you happen to drive Berninas, that's a cool thing. You can go back and forth. But a lot of sewing machines will come with an additional foot that you need to purchase, but that hopping foot is critical for good free motion quilting. You can certainly stitch having any type of foot on your machine, but it will be far more difficult. Now, sometimes certain machines will have things called a darning foot, or sometimes even an embroidery foot that will give you more visibility perhaps and be U-shaped instead of round. There's all kinds of options there, but in all cases, they're going to bounce. They're going to be a hopper foot. That's really critical. Okay, let's talk just briefly about the quilt sandwich. A quilt sandwich is just a bottom layer, some type of padding, fluff. In the UK, they call it wadding. In North America, we call it batting, and then your top layer of quilt. So those 3 layers is what you're stitching together. Again, to make it easier on yourself, I strongly recommend that you get something that's an appropriate weave. So, doing this on a satin or a silk or even a batik is going to be a little more difficult. Tight weaves, maybe irregular weaves. So quilting cottons are great, muslins are great to practice on. And when I first started free motion quilting, I literally just made little sandwiches that were about 12 inches square of those 3 layers. And I would just pull out a sandwich and practice. And it was easy to move and lightweight, and it was a great thing for practicing on. So super simple. They don't even require much basting of layers together because they're just small when you do those tiny practice sandwiches. And then lastly, there are some aids for helping you move that fabric. If you've got a tiny quilt sandwich, it's easier, but as you can imagine, when the fabric gets larger and it's a little more weighty, it can start to get actually fatiguing on your fingertips to be holding it in place. There's a number of different ways you can do that. I'll mention just a couple, but you can Google and find any amount of aids. But one of them is gloves that have rubberized fingertips. You can get actual machine quilting gloves, and I have often just used a gardening glove that's a snug fitting glove, but it has the rubberized tips that grip. I've seen people use small thimbles, the little silicone type thimbles that fit on your fingertips. And some others that I personally love are these little palm paddles, and they're by Martinelli, and you simply rest them on the quilt surface. And the bottoms of them are kind of halfway between cork and foam, but they just grip the fabric. And so you can just hold them in your palms and you can shift them whenever you need to. And they just aid in moving around that fabric. Bernina also makes gripper rings, which kind of have a knob on them. To my mind, they're well suited for doing fine quilting, but they have this same type of material on the back that just helps with that grip and really reduces your hand fatigue. Okay, what have I not mentioned? I bet there's a million comments and questions coming in because everybody has their own way of doing this. So this is not going to be a comprehensive list by any means. It's just what I think is essential. Wendy, Carla, Vanessa, just watch the feather tutorial. Awesome, Vanessa. There's not a lot of comments coming in. Okay, so maybe I've covered it. I did not get into threads. In upcoming days, I'm going to talk a little bit more about threads and color choices and things like that, types of threads that I like to use. So I think that's kind of good for today's topic, but let me tell you what April looks like, because I was a bit rattled with the camera at the beginning and forgot to say all this. I'm coming live on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram every day for the entire month of April, just chatting informally about topics related to machine quilting. So because long arm is my happy place, a lot of them will relate to working at the long arm machine, but I'm trying to include some topics like today that also are helpful for those of you who quilt at sit-down machines, whether it is in fact a long arm or whether it's your domestic sewing machine. That's what I do when I'm doing sit-down quilting. It's just at my domestic machine. And so that's what you'll be seeing me do. If you have any topics that you'd like to hear about, feel free to email me, Susan@stitchedbysusan.com, and I will either add them into the list or incorporate them into something that I've already got scheduled to talk about. But this is all leading up to the final week of April when I'm going to be opening enrollment to my freehand quilting masterclass. This masterclass is not an everything course. It does not talk about things like the supplies that you want for quilting. What it's all about is free motion quilting, different designs. So I teach over 30 designs throughout the class, and I spend a fair bit of time talking about how I develop those designs so that you can use this as a springboard to go and develop your own creative designs. Because again, one course could not teach you all the designs out there. They're limitless. They're only limited by your imagination. But I hope to teach my method for getting an idea, seeing something cool in wallpaper, and then taking that home and saying, how can I make a continuous free motion quilting design out of this? And what makes it work and what doesn't, and how do I change them, and all of that is part of the course. So that'll be coming in late April. Meantime, tune in as often as you can for these. I'm trying to do them in the mornings Pacific time. Life happens, right? So that varies a little bit. We had company overnight last night and they stayed for breakfast and coffee this morning, so that was lovely. So it varies a little bit, but I try and do it in the morning. So thumbs up if you're enjoying these episodes, and also if you turn your notifications on, then most of these platforms will let you know whenever I am going live. So I appreciate you joining me today. I hope that whatever you're doing, you have a great day, and I'll check back with you tomorrow.